Hello everyone and welcome back to another Strategoy video. I'm very excited to talk about our next LUMINETH unit, the Hurricane Wind Spirits and their named hero, Sevireth. These Wind Foxes are absolute tech pieces in our LUMINETH armies, and that makes them one of my favorite units to use. Let's dive right in. We'll check out their stats and War Scroll abilities first. We'll mainly be focusing on the standard Wind Spirits for that part. Next, we're checking out the 3 roles they can fulfill in a LUMINETH force, and we then move on to basic tactics. That's where we'll cover all their movement shenanigans. Lastly, we'll compare Sevireth to his unnamed counterpart and conclude which one's the better pick. Let's start off with their basic stat line. I won't go over every detail here, but there's a few things I'd like to highlight. First and foremost, their amazing movement speed of 24 inches. This allows them to zip around the battlefield with ease. This comes at a price though, because they're only rocking a 5+ save. When we look at their weapon profiles, we see that they're basically equipped with a ballista. 4 shots at -2 rend and D3 damage is nothing to sniff at. In melee, they'll not perform as well, but they've still got some punch to deal with small units. As for their abilities though, well, this is where things get really juicy. Move Like the Wind is a standard ability that all Hurricane units get. It allows them to pile in to wherever they want, and when they've charged, they can even pile in 6 inches instead of 3, and they can fly. This makes them very mobile and interesting to use in combat, which we'll discuss in detail in our basic tactics section. Into the Gale makes the Foxes a little tankier with a 5+ ward, and it subtracts 2 inches from nearby enemy pile-ins, preventing your opponent from using all his attacks. Living Cyclone is a debuff you apply when charging. Every unit within 3 inches of you suffers a mortal wound and a -1 to hit penalty on a roll of 3+ until the end of the combat phase. It's important to remember that this effect is applied immediately and is therefore in effect during Unleash Hell as well. The Spirit of the Wind ability is what makes these models absolutely amazing to use. At the end of each shooting phase, even in your opponent's, each Wind Spirit can move 12 inches. They can even retreat and charge later in the same turn. If you've got a Wind Mage close by, the Wind Spirit heals itself in each hero phase. This can be immensely impactful against enemy armies with trickle damage, but it is obviously useless when your opponent can focus down your Wind Spirit in 1 turn. When using Sevireth instead of an unnamed Wind Spirit, you get 2 more abilities. Scour used to be all the rage, as it basically removes the War Scroll abilities from enemy faction terrain. In 3rd edition though, this is a standard ability all monsters get, and it actually doesn't come up that much. Then again, rendering a Hearthstone useless for example, can impact the game quite a bit. It's important to note that it only removes the abilities of the terrain piece, not the terrain piece itself, nor its keywords. So abilities that are written on different War Scrolls or somewhere else in the book are still in effect. Sevireth also burns 1 unit he moves across. Choose one of those units and inflict D3 mortal wounds on a roll of 3+. This is nice little chip damage that's especially effective against small heroes, as you can then finish them off in either the shooting or the combat phase. When it comes to their role in the army, they're an absolute unique piece that is excellent at all of its roles, but terrible at all other things. Denying your opponent board space is what they're best at. Especially in the midfield, when there's still a lot of open space, you can really have your Wind Spirits roam free. We'll look at some examples in our basic tactics section, but to summarize, thanks to all their movement shenanigans, you can basically deny your opponent using his full movement by parking your Wind Spirit close by and then just weave out of it with your 12-inch movement in the shooting phase, or with pile out moves. Be wary of strong shooting or ranged magic though, as the Foxes cannot take a serious punch and will wither in a flash, especially the unnamed spirits. Due to their incredible mobility, they're also excellent at grabbing objectives and denying your opponent from taking them. If they're all buffed up with Power of Hish, max out all their moves and make a 12-inch charge, they could theoretically move 78 inches in one turn. Not that you'll ever need to, of course, but I just love how that absolutely embodies their windy nature. And because they're so fast and agile, it's nearly impossible to tie them down in combat, which is yet another reason why they're so good at defending objectives. You can zone out your opponent from moving onto an objective, and then just get out of dodge before they charge you. If you play your foxes well, they should never be in a combat you didn't choose yourself. On top of that, their range damage is pretty good, since their weapon profile is basically an improved ballista. I wouldn't count on them taking out whole swaths of units, but they're good at sniping key synergy pieces. A 5-wound hero that your opponent has deployed behind a wall can easily be targeted by a Wind Spirit with its insane movement. And if you just come up short with your missile shots, you can finish them off in combat. Keep in mind that leaves them open for some form of retaliation, but if you've done a good enough job, you should be able to avoid combat with your move in the shooting phase anyway. Now let's dive into a more detailed explanation. We'll look at which factions the Wind Spirits benefit most from first, and then we'll show some examples of movement and combat. As for nations, there's only two that really add something essential to the Wind Spirits. It's not Eumetrica, as its rules do not interact with Hurricane units. Sire's alright, though you will only ever be using one or maybe two of your Aether Quartz abilities. Being able to add one to your save twice, even in the same phase, is quite good though, as the foxes are really fragile. You'll want to use your quartz when you get shot, as you should never be tied up in a combat that you don't favor anyway. Eliada's rules do not add anything of note to the Wind Spirits, and neither does Sidetrack. Since they're already incredibly fast, there's also no use in choosing Alumnia for them. They do get quite a bit from Helen though. An extra shot in melee might seem useless, as by now I've repeated many times that you normally don't want to use them in combat. But there are those times where they just need to be a screen, or when they have to tie something up. Having that extra shot is useful in all those cases, and also makes your Unleash Hell more painful, potentially adding 3 damage to your output. The extra move in the combat phase is mostly useless and best used on other units, but if you really wanted to move at a speed of light, you could add yet another 24 inches to your total movement, pushing you over the theoretical maximum and past 100 inches. Before we move on, I do want to note something about this segment. Remember that we always look at each nation from the standpoint of the model we're discussing. So it's not because a Wind Spirit doesn't gain anything from being in Zytrek that it's not an excellent pick in a Zytrek force. With that out of the way, we get to the nitty-gritty. Here's where the fun really begins. Since their strength mainly rests upon their movement, we decided to dedicate 2 slides to it. One about standard movement and one about moving in combat. Let's start off with that standard movement, although there's actually nothing standard about it. Wind Spirits are excellent at denying your opponent board space. Let's say they have a strong unit that you want to slow down. You could simply park your fox just outside of 3 inches of that unit. When time comes for your opponent to move that unit, he won't be able to, as he can't move within 3 inches of yours. He'll be forced to maneuver around your Wind Spirit or find another way to deal with it. When they think of charging you, you just move more than 9 inches in your shooting phase, so that you're more than 12 inches away, effectively making it impossible for most units to make it any charge attempts at all. You can use this same tactic to protect your objectives. Park the Wind Spirit's most forward point more than 6 inches away from the objective, but keep its furthest point within objective range. Since your opponent cannot come closer than 3 inches to you, There is no way he's taking that objective by just moving onto it. He will have to charge. You can obviously deny him that chance, as we've discussed, but you could also allow it and use your pile-in movement to get out of dodge. If you want to be more aggressive with your movement, there's plenty of shenanigans you can pull off in combat too. Think of all the times where you've wanted to kill a specific hero that's hiding behind a small screening unit. With a Wind Spirit, that's usually not a problem. When you've charged, you pile in 6 inches to wherever you want, and even fly over units. Add your 3-inch range on your weapons to that, and you'll be able to damage units hiding as far away as 9 inches. I also like to use the Wind Spirits to neutralize monsters or big heroes. I might even charge them myself for a cheeky mortal wound and a -1 to hit, and then simply pile out before they can hit me. Or I might let them come to me. They charge me, I unleash hell, and if they target me, I pop my defensive abilities. Having a 5+ ward is excellent against big damage attacks. If they don't activate that monster first, I'll just pile out of combat entirely if they've got good range on their weapons. If they're swinging with 1-inch weapons though, I'll move back so that I'm just within 3 inches. That's still within my own weapon range, but they cannot hit me back, as they can only pile in 1 inch due to my Into the Gale ability. Calculate your chances before moving into combat though. Even with a ward save and forcing a smaller pile-in move on your opponent, a Wind Spirit will die to most dedicated damage dealers. In some situations, that's exactly what you want though. For example, when you want to save a different unit. Since Hurricane units can pile out of combat, my opponent cannot always resist the temptation to fight them first, allowing me to activate 2 of my other units without suffering any casualties there. And now, there only remains one question to be answered. Who does it best? Sevireth or the unnamed Wind Spirit? Let's make a quick comparison before we come to a conclusion. Sevireth's missile weapon has 1 better rend, which is huge, and he also has 2 more wounds and 2 extra abilities, disabling faction terrain and dealing D3 mortal wounds when flying over an enemy unit. His current point cost is 80 points higher than his unnamed counterpart though. Since Lumineth are already immensely expensive, it might be difficult to squeeze Sevireth into a list. That massive point difference is the only reason why I would not always recommend taking Sevireth over the unnamed spirit. Even though their basic strengths, like denying movement and zoning objectives, are the same, Sevireth's just so much more reliable. He has better damage with his improved rend and mortal wounds flyover, and most importantly, he's much more survivable. He has 2 extra wounds, and since he's a hero, he can use heroic actions like their finest hour or heroic recovery to boost his save or recover some wounds. For those reasons, I personally try to take Sevireth over an unnamed fox, since I just love his reliability. Then again, 80 points is a lot. Never drop a key endless spell like Spell Portals or Life Swarm for him, but he might serve you better than a filler unit. To use a real life example, if I have to choose between a minimum sized Dawn Rider unit and an unnamed fox, or Sevireth and an endless spell like Life Swarm, I'm almost always taking the latter. And there you have it. Our in-depth guide on the Wind Spirits has officially come to an end. This was yet again a requested guide, so we'd love for you to leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed it, or if you have any other requests. Also, feel free to share and subscribe, as we post guides weekly and we really thrive on your support. I enjoyed making this guide especially because I just love foxes. So thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Have a great week.